Onto your headphones and pour your favorite beverage. It's time for the Kickin or Stickin Fantasy Football Podcast. Now, fresh off the sidelines, your host, Matt McPeek.
Fantasy freaks and geeks, what is up? Welcome to the Keepers and Dynasty League edition of the Kickin or Stickin Fantasy Football Podcast. This is a fun episode. Got two guests lined up for this show. First guest is my OG co-host from back in the Dudes and Beer days, Adam Nattress. Thank you for joining the show. How's it going, bro? How are you?
I'm good, guys. Good to be back. I'm happy to be here. Quarantined up, talking about fantasy football. How are you doing?
I'm good, man. I've honestly kind of been enjoying this quarantine because I've just been doing nothing but fantasy stuff every single day. Obviously, with this podcast and with us starting a Dynasty League, which we will get into in a little bit. But we're going to start talking about Keepers Leagues. So, Adam, I know you're in a couple Keeper Leagues, and I know last year we were talking a little bit about keepers, but just to kind of give a little intro to some people that maybe don't know what a keepers league is, basically instead of redrafting your team every year from scratch, you and your fellow league mates get to keep a certain number of players from the previous year. The amount of players you can keep, and the more importantly, what you lose in compensation for those players that you decide to keep drastically affects the decisions that you make as far as who you're going to keep. So some leagues have limits on the amount of years you can keep a player, or you can keep players drafted. You can't keep players drafted in the first round, for example, all kinds of different rules. Why do you want to start a keepers league? Well, if you're getting a little bored of the whole redraft thing, but you don't want to dive headfirst into a full out dynasty league, this is the perfect medium ground there. So there's three basic ways that teams can decide on how they keep players. So there's the salary cap, where they base it off of years. So let's say your league has 15 roster spots per team with, let's say, 30 years worth of salary cap. After the draft, each team then assigns each player an amount of years. So obviously you want to give the most years to your best players, your young players, and you want to give the fewest years to your backups and the older players. You can set limits on how many years you can keep players and all kinds of things. The next format, which is probably usually the most common, is basically you just keep 3 or 4 guys, or really any amount. This is simply, you just pick a certain number of players that you want to keep, and those are the guys that you keep. There's no penalties associated with it. You don't have to keep track of a salary cap or anything. And you can also set limits on the maximum amount of years that you're allowed to keep players in that format. I joined a keepers league last year that you can keep one player. And the way that we do it is really stupid, which again, we'll get into in a minute. But the third way, which is I think the coolest way, is round penalties. So each member keeps a certain amount of players, but each player counts as a draft pick. So when you have your next draft, you lose certain picks depending on which players you end up keeping. Typically, if you keep a guy you drafted in the 5th round, you lose your 5th round pick. Or some leagues like to do, if you draft a player in the 5th, you lose your 4th round pick. Some leagues don't allow you to keep your 1st round pick. Some leagues allow that, let's say you add somebody in free agency, that pick would then count towards your 15th round pick or whatever your last round pick is. So there are a lot of variations for this system, but it seems to me the most strategic from year to year is the round penalty system. So, Adam, let's get into some of these questions for you because you are the most experienced keeper league player that I know. So how does your league pick their sleepers? What system do you guys use? Do you have the round penalties? Do you have a salary cap? What's up?
So we are the round penalty type. You get to keep 3 players. That number had increased from 2 over the past 2 years. But you get to keep 3 players, and you keep them for the round in which they were drafted. Now, that's the first year you keep them. You have a max of 3 seasons. And each progressive year, you keep them between the difference in which their projected draft number is and where you had them at. So, for example, on my team, I got Tyler Boyd in the 16th round. Tyler Boyd was projected probably like the 8th round, I think, last year, maybe 9th.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to keep him so that was, I think, the second time I'm sorry. So the first time I kept him, it was for the 16th. And then the next time I kept him would be for whatever the difference in projection is. So it might be an 8th. I mean, that would be if he's in the first round. So that's not the case. But
right. So it's probably like a 12th
like
or a 13th. Yeah.
Yep.
Right. Okay.
Sorry about that. Sometimes I've been doing this league so long, I forget exactly who I've kept for how long and when.
Right.
We've recycled now plenty of times, which makes it interesting. So your Le'Veon Bells, Le'Veon came in at a 9th rounder. You can imagine how mad I was that he wasn't on my team.
Right.
So
now, you said 3 years is the maximum amount of years that you're allowed to keep a guy.
Yep. After that 3rd year, he automatically goes back into the draft.
Okay. And so what are your biggest decisions this year going into the 2020 draft? Who are the guys that you're contemplating keeping, and what pick are you going to lose for keeping that player?
So I already highlighted the one, and I'm really going to – so Tyler Boyd for me is a interesting one. He'd be kept for a 12th. We all know Joe Burrow went there. And Tyler Boyd is a fantastic number 2 receiver there. When A.J. Green is healthy, which he is finally, Tyler Boyd seems to flourish with that. Well, and plus with Joe Burrow, it could be even more incredible. Obviously, it's a question mark because it's still Tyler Boyd.
Right, and on top of that, they drafted in the 2nd round T. Higgins.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
And then you never know with a guy like Auden Tate, who's just that big and fast, if 1 year it clicks.
Right, yeah.
So – people kind of slight him because of the T. Higgins draft. So Tyler Boyd and then John Ross is the speedster. So really, it's a big question mark. But I'd be dumb to not say I would not think about it thoroughly because they did take Burrow. The next one is Miles Sanders. So I would keep Miles Sanders for a 4th round pick. Running backs are marquee in my keeper league, as in most. And a guy like Miles, there's going to be a lot of hype as it gets closer to the season. I'm sure his stock will go up, but he is a running back on the Eagles. My Philadelphia Eagles do not use a single back running back since the likes of Shady 10 years ago. I don't expect that to change.
Right.
And it's not a dynasty league, so I'd get him this year and next, and you'd have to hope for God that he would be that guy, right? So again, it's something you have to really think about. The 4th round pick is up there. Your 4th round is when you're really trying to fill your core part of the roster. So do I want Miles Sanders effectively as my number 2 running back? And then the one I don't have to think about, I just like to brag about because of a coup I had made, a trade I made last year for the likes of Aaron Jones. I get to keep Aaron Jones in the 12th round.
Nice.
Yeah. So that I wanted to highlight as to why Miles Sanders is – where I'm like, you know what, I might keep him for the 4th because I have Aaron Jones in the 12th round.
Yeah.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, are my keeper questions and definitive facts with Aaron Jones going into this season.
Yeah,
I'm excited.
That's a tough one, too, especially with what the Packers did in the draft, getting a running back with the 2nd pick. You got to figure that Aaron Jones is going to be a free agent going into next season. So, let's say he goes to a team like my New York Football Jets that could be really, really looking for a young running back. That would be
fruitful for all.
That would be exciting. So, I want to go through the keeper league that I joined last year. So, like I said, you only keep one guy, and as of right now, there's no rule to for a penalty for keeping the guy. There's no salary cap or anything like that. So basically, whoever you decide to keep counts as your 1st round pick, essentially. The way we did it last year was everybody said who their keeper was, and then we just started the draft. So I think it's kind of dumb. I asked the commissioner if we can change that up this year and use the round penalty, obviously, because I think it adds a whole nother layer of strategy, and obviously it rewards players or rewards owners who make really good picks, at the back half of the draft. So here's my dilemma. Let's say hopefully all goes well and the commissioner does agree to install the whole penalty system. I got Lamar Jackson in the 10th round last year.
Ooh, that's spicy.
Yeah, so it's pretty much I'm pretty much deciding between him and if they do a thing where, if you add a player off of waivers, you can keep him as your last round pick. I added Mark Andrews in the as a free agent last year.
I hate to rewash a word, but ooh, that is spicy.
Yeah,
I
dude.
like that.
And especially in a standard league, it's not PPR. So
tight ends are very difficult to come by.
Right. So I got Mark Andrews off waivers on October 30th. His bye week was in week 8, so it was right before his it was during his bye week. When he was dropped after week 7, he was the number 4 tight end in half PPR, number 3 in standard, which, again, this is a standard scoring league. And he finished the season as the number 4 tight end behind only Travis Kelce, George Kittle, and Darren Waller in half PPR leagues. He was number 2 in standard. So it's a tough call, man. Do I take what could be, again, the best quarterback with a 10th round, or do I take what could be a top 3 tight end with my last pick of the draft?
Well, my personal opinion, if you're asking for this, is probably going to go against the grain, maybe. You never know with all these fantasy experts out there now. However, I think, and I firmly believe in the second year defensive coordinator, what are we going to call it, a curse? Where the defensive coordinators somewhat figure out a little bit better how to defend them so they're not quite as prolific. Of course, we've seen guys completely blow that to smithereens. But the reason I bring that up is because I still think it's too hard to find a good tight end. There's a handful out there that do it consistently.
Yeah.
But it's tough to pass on Lamar Jackson for a 10, so I did not help you at all.
Thanks, bro.
I don't want my opinion to be wrong on that one.
From when I added him, after from week 9 on, he had both of his 100-plus yard receiving games were in week 1 and 2. He didn't have another one all season, but he did have 7 touchdowns in 7 games, including 2 in the fantasy playoffs in week 15, which we'll talk about in a minute. Another interesting thing. But yeah, man, Mark Andrews was a stud last year, and that's going to be a really tough decision for me depending on how that rule goes. So another interesting player for keepers leagues is Kenyan Drake, who was last year, with the Dolphins, he was trash, and I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of guys dropped him after the first couple games of the season. So in our league, he was drafted in the 8th round by our commissioner. He was dropped after I think it was week 4 that he was dropped. He only had 75 total yards on 17 touches in the first 2 weeks, so he did not come off to a good start. And then after sitting on the waiver wire from weeks 3 to 5, I added Kenyan Drake on October 28th at 7 a.m., which was the Monday of week 7. Even though they had a bye coming up in week 8, I heard rumors that he might get traded, so I was like, screw it, I'm just going to add this dude and see where he ends up going. Luckily, he goes to the Cardinals, and they played on that next Thursday night in week 9, which was Halloween, actually. And in his first game with the Cardinals, Drake had his 3rd best game of the year with 162 total yards on 15 carries, caught 4 passes. It was the most touches that he had all year up to that point. And he scored a rushing touchdown. So, I couldn't figure out how to
stud.
Right, dude. So I couldn't figure out how to go back and look at week 9's score on Yahoo. One of the reasons why I'm not a big fan of Yahoo, but I'm pretty sure I did not start him, but I still won by 24.5 points. I did go back and look at the scores, and I did win that week. So thankfully I wasn't screwed that week. But this is where it gets interesting. So then over weeks 10 and 12, he only averaged 5.7 fantasy points per game in standard leagues again. So I dropped him December 4th, right before week 13. He then had another pretty pedestrian game in week 13, but in week 14, he had the best game of his career with 146 total yards and 4 touchdowns versus Cleveland.
He won my league.
Did he?
Fair.
I'm sure he won a lot of people's leagues.
Yep, that's why this is a familiar path you're taking us on, unfortunately.
So he was then added on December 18th going into Week 15 and the fantasy playoffs by, get this, the same dude who drafted him, the commissioner of the league.
No.
He ended up with the number 1 seed. I ended up with the number 2 seed. And wouldn't you know it, the two of us met in the fantasy championships where Kenyan Drake had another huge game, 184 total yards and 2 touchdowns that week. Luckily for me, Lamar Jackson threw 3 touchdowns and rushed for 103 yards. Mark Andrews had that big 93-yard, 2-touchdown game that I talked about earlier. Marlon Mack had over 100 yards and a touchdown, and Devontae Adams had 116 yards that week. So luckily I still won. Yeah, dude, I was sweating it, though, bro. I was worried because also, if you remember, I had Dalvin Cook on my team as well, who was the number 2 running back going into Week 16, only behind Christian McCaffrey. And I had his handcuff as well, Alexander Madison, and neither of them played Week 16. Mike Boone got the start in Week 16. And I also had Ezekiel Elliott, who he had his second worst game of the year in Week 16. So I would have been so incredibly pissed at myself if I lost because I dropped Kenyan Drake. But this brings up a big point. Like I said, the commissioner, he's kind of in a bind here because depending on how he makes the rules for our keepers will pretty much determine whether or not he gets probably the best value keeper this year. Does he make it, you keep a player based on where they were drafted, even if it was someone that you added in free agency, which means he would keep him as his 8th round pick, or it's if you added somebody via free agency, you get him for your last round pick. So Kenyan Drake, who could be a second-round pick this year in standard leagues, could be kept for a 15th-round pick, which I think that's probably the best. That's probably even a better value than Lamar Jackson in the 10th or Mark Andrews in the 15th. Would you agree?
Yeah, 100%. And can I tell you, we started out our keeper league just like that, where free agent ad got put as the last round. You know what I mean? Yours is 15th, ours was the 16th. Things happened. Someone made a mistake. Your boy ended up with Julio at the 16th round.
Damn.
Yeah. So after that, we immediately said no. If the player was drafted in this round, it doesn't matter how he got onto your team. That is what you keep him for.
So wait,
unless he's already been kept. So
someone in your league dropped Julio Jones?
Yep.
What?
This was early on. Forgot it was a keeper league. I actually was not the one who picked him up. Someone else had picked him up, and I orchestrated a trade.
Dude, I don't care.
For him.
I don't care what kind of league it is. It's Julio Jones, bro. What the hell?
And this was prime Julio years too.
Yeah,
so
right.
We called it Julio Gate, mainly because I got to keep him in the end for 16th round. And
that's awesome.
It's an outlier situation, I know, but it can happen.
Right.
Which makes situations just, you got a Kenyan Drake situation. I highly advise to try and push for the draft buy round.
Okay.
And then that way, if someone gets a good ad in free agency from a guy that wasn't drafted, well, God bless him.
Right.
Again, that's David Johnson 2 years ago.
Yeah, that's a good call. A couple other picks that kind of stood out to me. We'll kind of wrap it up with this because I got that another call with another guest coming up right up after this. Chris Godwin in the 6th round, Kareem Hunt and DJ Moore in the 9th round, your boy Miles Sanders in the 10th round, Christian Kirk in the 13th round, Emmanuel Sanders in the 14th round, and Kyler Murray in the 15th round. So I think the league is pretty motivated to go with the whole round penalty thing because, as you could see, there's a whole lot of really good players that were taken at the back half of the draft. Hopefully the commissioner, hopefully he puts that rule into place. So with that, Adam, I appreciate it. Thanks for coming on the podcast. It's good to have you back on. Anytime I can get you back on the show is always good. And yeah, thanks for coming on, bro.
Awesome. Great to be back. Good luck to everybody.
So we are now I'm going to drop in the phone call with our next guest. We're going to be talking about Dynasty. So sit tight for just a minute. All right, so I am here with Evan Parker, the commissioner of the Hoot Rooters League. a 12-team full PPR that I have won twice. Thank you very much. Evan was gracious enough to allow me to join, even though we have never met. And it's been, 6 years now, Evan?
6, yeah, I think just about 6 years now.
Yeah, and we have still yet to meet, man. What the hell? We got to get a live draft one of these years.
I know. I'm planning on it. Hopefully, we can get one soon.
That would be sweet. So thanks for coming on the podcast. What's up, man? How's this stupid ass virus treating you?
You know, I'm living in Florida, so it's almost like it's not too bad at the moment. But I do have family living up in Pennsylvania and Ohio, so I know it's pretty serious up there. So we're just all trying to make the best of the situation. I'm just working from home.
Cool.
I just moved into a house literally the week before everyone had to hunker down. So I'm thankful that I've been in my house instead of my apartment.
Yeah, right. And you're in the Miami area or Tampa?
Tampa Bay.
Cool.
Yes.
Sweet, man. Well, honestly, I'm just hoping that we get baseball back. I'm hoping that football will be okay by freaking August. But, yeah, this not having any baseball is really, really killing me. So, well, cool, man. I appreciate you coming on, and I appreciate you coming on to talk about Dynasty football. So, last year I was not very happy. Not only did you and a bunch of the other Hoot Rooters start a Dynasty league without me, but you guys bailed on my all-IDP league. So, you broke my heart. I don't appreciate it. I got to get you back for one of those. But, no, I'm just playing. But yeah, let's talk about your Dynasty League. So what was your strategy going into your startup draft, your initial draft last year?
Well, Matt, first off, this league kind of started out just me talking with a couple friends in Tampa. And after it gained a little bit of interest, I asked my friends here in Florida if they wanted to join the league. And after that, I only had about 3 or 4 spaces. So I texted the guys I've known longer in our Hoot Rooters league before I texted you. Trust me, I would have invited you into this league. But
I'm just breaking your balls, bro. It's all good. I totally get it.
But, yeah, so this Dynasty league I made, I was just listening to a few podcasts, and it sounded pretty interesting. And it's a PPR, full PPR Superflex league. So my strategy going in with the 4th pick, I knew the only thing I knew I wanted in this draft was Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson. Mm-hmm. I figured if I'm going to be keeping up with this league as long as I've kept up with my other league, I want to watch someone I enjoy watching for those few years. For those at least 6. I'm hoping this goes longer than 6, though. Mm-hmm. So with this being a super flex, I had Patrick Mahomes ranked as the number 1 guy, and he fell to me at the 4th spot. So I took Mahomes, and my strategy following that was just stick to my rankings. I usually do tier-based rankings, which I tried, and I did enough mock drafts that I thought I could get a low-end running back 1 and wide receiver 1 on the 2nd and 3rd round. And after that, it's just building a good team of youth and veterans. If you go entirely youth, your team's probably going to be pretty bad the first couple years of the Dynasty. And let's face it, we all want to win when we're playing fantasy football.
Hell yeah. Yeah, that Lamar Jackson. So last year I was in 6 leagues, and I think I had Lamar in 5 of them. The only one I didn't have him in was the Hoot Rooters, and you picked him the pick before me. So good on you. I'm sure you ended up doing pretty well, just like I did in all my leagues with Lamar. He is definitely, to me, in this Dynasty League, if I have the opportunity to get, like you said, either one of them, I'm going to take them. And honestly, I'll probably try and get both of them if I can, just because of the whole Superflex thing, which thank you for recommending that, because it was a big thing with the rest of the guys in my Dynasty startup is, do we do the 2QB or do we do the Superflex thing? And we kind of sided more towards the versatility of the Superflex, and I brought up one guy that was like, oh, it's so stupid. Everyone's going to be playing a quarterback in the Superflex anyway. But you brought up how the gentleman that won your league played a wide receiver in his Superflex the entire year. So that just kind of goes to show that just because it's Superflex doesn't mean you got to keep a quarterback in that second spot all year long. So how did you geez, I just lost my spot in my extensive notes. Okay. What was your strategy with your throughout the year with your waiver wire and your trades? I know you made at least one trade because you ended up with an extra pick in the rookie draft. But how did you approach the waiver wire in your dynasty league as opposed to your redraft leagues?
So something that we did this year in the dynasty that I've never done before, excuse me. We usually do rolling waivers in our other league, but this year I introduced FOB, which I'm sure you know what FOB is.
Oh yeah, what is it? Free agent acquisition bucks.
Yes.
Right.
So we did $100 FOB for the year for every team. So the way I went about waivers was just I would rather catch a big fish than a bunch of small fish. So I sat on my money, and when I thought the opportunity was right, I dropped a lot more FOB into a player than other people would, just so I know I got my guy.
What's one player that kind of stands out, if you can remember, somebody that you added during the season in your dynasty league on the waiver wire?
Oh, last season I added Darius Slayton.
There you go. That's a good one. Yeah, for sure. Nice young guy too.
I know. Yeah. I mean, I can't believe I honestly looked and I couldn't believe that he was still on a free agent, especially this being dynasty, and we have a 20-person roster. So I unloaded to get him.
Right. Nice ad by you, dude. He should be. I don't know if he'll be the number one there in New York, but he should definitely see plenty of targets. And I think that New York Giants offense is going to be better than what people are expecting him to be. I know that's probably not what you want to hear as an Eagles fan, but so let's transition over to your rookie draft this year. How did you approach that rookie draft? Tell us about that trade you made to acquire that fourth pick in your rookie draft, and give us some of the guys that you added.
So there was actually quite a few trades in this draft. With the whole coronavirus, we didn't know when we were going to be doing the rookie draft, but I thought after the NFL draft, I thought maybe giving it 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and talking with the rest of the league, they thought it was good as well. So what we ended up doing was put no time limit on the draft and starting it on a Friday night, and it lasted 3 full days. So there was a lot of movement. So the first pick I made was the 103, and I was at the 104 to begin with.
Wow, nice.
So I moved up one spot and got Clyde Edwards-Helaire, which I thought was the best running back and the best player in this rookie draft. And then the trade I made was a guy who had the 101 and the 103. So he also gave me the 201 in the trade back.
Nice.
So from the 201, I moved up. My running backs are pretty bad in this dynasty league I have. So I knew I wanted to get a couple running backs, and Cam Akers fell to the 109. So I gave the call when he was at the 109 spot and moved up with 2 second rounders, the 201, my next year's second rounder, and Tyler Higbee. I thought I could make that move just because I have 2 first round picks in next year's draft as well.
Now, when you made that trade, or when you made that pick of Cam Akers, was what other running backs were still available? If you remember, was Jonathan Taylor still available?
No. So this being super flex, the first pick was Joe Burrows.
Okay.
And then the second pick was Jonathan Taylor.
Right.
And after that, when I got Clyde, it was a mix of running backs and the 2 top 6 quarterbacks. until the 108, where I thought Cam Akers was going to go, but they ended up going with CeeDee Lamb.
Okay.
So Cam Akers, the only running backs that were still on the board was Vaughn from Tampa Bay, Zach Moss, A.J. Dillon. And I thought that this year's rookie running backs had a clear tier 1 and 2 of those top 5 guys, and then after that I saw a pretty big drop off.
Nice. Yeah, I like Cam Akers, man. I think he's going to be awesome in that zone rushing scheme that they run in L.A. Is he the next Todd Gurley? I don't know, but he looks like it's going to be a perfect fit for him there. So how did you guys decide on your rookie draft order? Was it just the inverse of the finishing standings, or how did you guys go about that?
Yeah, so we did the inverse of the standings. Okay. Correct. And like I said earlier, the guy who ended up winning didn't have a single pick until the 3.12. We do 3 rounds, and he actually won last year, starting 4 wide receivers the entire season.
Wow, and he traded his first 2 rookie draft picks for, I'm assuming, some veterans to try and win now, I guess.
Yes.
Nice. Cool, man. One thing that reading up about and doing some research, the supplemental draft this year could throw a huge mucky wrench into dynasty leagues, especially when you consider guys like Trevor Lawrence or DeMornay Chase with LSU possibly being available on your waiver wire for teams that have already had their rookie draft. So did you guys talk about that? Do you have any plans in place for how you're going to deal with, let's say, the supplemental draft comes around and guys like Trevor Lawrence look at the situation and they say, hey, there's no guarantee that there's going to be a college season, so I'm just going to declare in the supplemental draft and whatever happens.
Yeah, so we did discuss the possibility of the college season not happening and there being a supplemental draft, and the NFL getting this influx of young talent who probably would have been the top or some of the top picks in this year's rookie draft. And what we would end up doing is adding a 2-round supplemental draft to our league and doing a completely randomized order.
Cool.
So we usually would be doing a linear draft for the supplemental, but in this case we would do a snake draft.
Okay. Very cool, man. Well, hey, do you have any other tips for the listeners who might be either starting a dynasty league or might be going into their first rookie draft? Any tips at all that you have for the listeners?
Yeah, I just remember this is a dynasty league and this is your team, so just try and make it your own. If you think you're reaching on somebody, but he's not going to make it back to you, you're going to have plenty of chances later on in the draft to get a sleeper. So I would say make the pick. A lot of people thought that making the Patrick Mahomes pick was dumb. It may have been in hindsight because I could have got Lamar Jackson in the 5th round. But I say just make your team your own and know who you want as a late draft sleeper. Because with 20 rounds, when you start to get to that bottom of the list, you're really just trying to pick a couple young guys who might flourish.
Right. Yeah, I got no problem taking Patrick Mahomes, especially number 4 overall in a super flex. I would assume he'd be the first one to go off the board. But when you're set at quarterback, it just makes playing fantasy football so much easier because you don't have to worry about constantly streaming that QB spot or playing somebody like my boy Sam Darnold or somebody like that. So awesome, man. Well, again, thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. And make sure that you guys check out the podcast next week. We're going to be breaking down what is the topic for next week. I don't even remember. I think we're going to be talking about tight end and running back parlay tickets. I hit on a whole bunch of tight end anytime scoring touchdown parlays last year, and I want to share that with you guys. So again, Evan, thanks for joining the podcast. Thanks also to Adam Nattress, who joined us earlier. And as always, may the fantasy gods be cruel to your opponents.
You have been listening to the Kickin' or Stickin' Fantasy Football Podcast. For more great episodes and information, follow us on social media and tune in every week. Kickin' or Stickin' is available on Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Alexa, Reach.tv, or your favorite podcast service. Kickin' or Stickin' is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. To find out more about this and other great shows on our network, visit us online at hcuniversalnetwork.com today. Fantasy football is fun, but gambling addiction destroys lives. If you or someone you love suffers from gambling addiction, please do not be afraid to seek help. The National Council on Problem Gambling operates the National Problem Gambling Helpline Network. Contact them today at 1-800-522-4700. Thank you for tuning in to the Kickin' or Stickin' Fantasy Football Podcast. Please remember to play responsibly and always look for your man downfield.